Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a world lit by candlelight and coal smoke, where telegrams clack through the night and headlines scream of war in Europe. But your ship lies half a world away, anchored beneath the red circle of the rising sun. The year is 1914. You lean over the rail at Yokosuka Harbor as gulls circle lazily above gray battleships, their decks bristling with brass fittings, and disciplined sailors polishing every rivet until it glints. Steam curls from funnels, the tang of salt and oil hangs heavy, and even though Japan hasn't fired a shot yet, you can feel the electricity in the air. You probably won't survive this century, but tonight, this moment, you get to witness a nation deciding what kind of empire it wants to become. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing the map of this little community light up around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in Tokyo, late summer 1914, where the cicadas are louder than the streetcars, and every newspaper kiosk is plastered with photos of mustached European generals. To the average passerby, the fighting in Belgium feels impossibly distant. Yet in government offices overlooking the Imperial Palace moat, men in crisp white uniforms and black frock coats are murmuring about opportunity. Japan has been allied with Britain since 1902, a pact born out of mutual suspicion of Russia. But the British Empire's latest telegram changes everything. London has declared war on Germany and expects its ally in the Far East to lend a hand. But does Japan truly have to? That's the first debate you overhear. Some cabinet ministers argue that the alliance only requires Japan to act if Britain's Asian interests are threatened. Others, especially the fiery foreign minister Kato Takaki, see the European chaos as divine timing. If the tiger is wounded, one officer whispers, strike while it limps. Historians still argue whether Tokyo joined the Allies out of obligation or pure ambition, but as you sip your tea and glance out at the Imperial Navy's silhouettes, it's clear which motive wins hearts: ambition. After all, Japan's transformation over the past half-century has been meteoric. Just 50 years ago, samurai carried swords and the country kept Westerners out. Now, Tokyo boasts electric streetlights and a parliament modeled on Prussia's. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 crowned Japan as the first Asian nation to defeat a European power. It's as if the country inhaled the Industrial Revolution in one breath and exhaled steel, ships, and swagger. And yet, deep down, many leaders still sense that the Western world doesn't see them as equals. That nagging resentment hums beneath every diplomatic exchange, like the low drone of temple drums on a humid night. So when Britain politely inquires about help, Japan reads it as permission. The Navy drafts plans to seize Germany's colonial possessions in East Asia and the Pacific, namely Qingdao in Shandong, the crown jewel of Germany's Far Eastern Empire. You picture generals gathered around a map, fingers tracing dotted lines through the Yellow Sea. A short, splendid little war, one of them says, echoing America's boast from 1898. Someone else jokes that if Europe insists on fighting over trenches, Japan will fight over trade routes instead. Outside, Tokyo buzzes with patriotic fervor. Shops sell miniature flags, school children march through the Ginza singing Gunjin, the soldier's song, and newspapers print breathless headlines. Japan to aid allies, defend Asia from Kaiser's threat. It's part truth, part marketing. The Japanese public is told their navy will protect shipping lanes and secure peace in the Orient. But behind the slogans lies cold calculation. If Japan occupies German bases, it can later demand to keep them. By mid-August, Emperor Taisho signs the declaration of war against Germany. The imperial rescript is read aloud in shrines and schools, its words carried by wind and wireless alike. You can almost hear the rhythmic chanting of students. Long live the Empire! Long live the Emperor! a single quirky tidbit from the time. Some Tokyo department stores offer victory discounts on imported German beer, an ironic way to toast the enemy. Meanwhile, the army mobilizes. Steam whistles echo across Nagoya's rail yards as troop trains rumble toward the ports. Soldiers in khaki uniforms shoulder Arisaka rifles, their faces serious but eager. Most have never left the home islands. Some will never return, though they don't know it yet. You trail along the dockside crowds as banners wave and brass bands play Sousa marches borrowed from American scores, proof that cultural imports can survive even among would-be conquerors. The Navy, too, comes alive. Admiral Kamimura Hikonojo's fleet unfurls like a metal chrysanthemum across the Pacific, destroyers and cruisers moving out in formation. The war may have begun in muddy European trenches, but Japan's will be fought on open water. The Asama, a proud armored cruiser, leads patrols through the South China Sea. British officers stationed in Hong Kong send polite telegrams of thanks. Privately, some mutter about the Orientals getting ideas above their station. Still, necessity trumps prejudice. Britain's own navy is stretched thin, and Japan's help is suddenly invaluable. As the days shorten, you can feel the empire stretching its limbs. The government orders the seizure of German cable stations and Pacific Islands from the Marshalls to the Carolines. Even before the first official landing, small Japanese survey ships begin quietly mapping lagoons and harbors. Historians call this Japan's first Pacific expansion, though it feels more like the rehearsal for a far larger play. At home, enthusiasm burns hot and brief. Street vendors sell postcards of heroic sailors, though most depict them standing next to British officers, as if validation itself must wear a British uniform. Magazines praise the war effort while subtly reminding readers that Japan's true mission is to bring order to Asia. The words taste benign, but you can sense the imperial appetite beneath them. A mild autumn breeze blows across the Imperial Palace gardens, carrying rumors and promises. Prime Minister Okuma Shigenobu, an old liberal reformer with a white beard that makes him look halfway between Confucius and Santa Claus, reassures reporters that Japan's involvement will be limited. "We seek peace and stability," he declares. You can almost hear the smirk in the background press corps. Limited wars have a habit of expanding. Across the sea, in Shandong, German officials scramble to fortify their base at Qingdao, today's Qingdao. Beer flows freely at the officers' club, partly from nerves, partly from denial. They joke that Japan's army won't handle modern artillery or European tactics. You'll soon see how wrong they are. But for now, the rising sun glows crimson on the horizon, and every shipyard in Yokosuka and Sasebo clangs with hammers. Night settles over the Pacific. On the decks of the cruiser Izumo, sailors tie down tarpaulins and check their ammunition. You smell the faint sweetness of sakura soap mixed with cordite oil. Somewhere, a gramophone scratches out "Sakura Sakura," the folk tune that's half lullaby, half dirge. The empire is awake. The world is at war. And you, standing on the edge of the dock, sea spray chilling your face, sense that Japan's journey through the Great War won't simply be about loyalty to allies. It will be about claiming a seat among the great powers, even if it means rewriting the rules of the old world order. Tomorrow, the fleet will steam toward Shandong, and the thunder of guns will echo across the bay. But tonight, Tokyo sleeps under lantern light, the shadows of battleships rippling across the water like dreams of destiny. The night before Japan's declaration of war reaches Berlin, you find yourself inside a smoky conference chamber in Tokyo's foreign ministry. The air is thick with pipe smoke, ink, and the metallic tang of anxiety. Cabinet ministers in frock coats whisper in clipped tones. Aides shuffle telegrams stamped "Most Urgent." On the wall hangs a large world map with red pins clustered across Asia. Korea, Manchuria, Formosa. Japan's young empire stretching like a spider web spun overnight. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Europe is burning. But here the mood is more calculating than fearful. Japan's destiny, they say, lies not in Europe's trenches, but in the shifting power currents of Asia. You can almost hear the clatter of typewriters as drafts of the ultimatum to Germany are prepared, an ultimatum demanding that German ships leave East Asian waters and that the fortress at Qingdao be surrendered. The language is polite, almost painfully so, yet every line drips with quiet menace. When the German reply arrives, a curt refusal, you can practically see the gleam in Foreign Minister Kato Takaaki's eyes. Perfect. Within days, war is official. Church bells ring. Newspapers roar. Students parade through the Ginza waving banners of the rising sun. The Anglo-Japanese alliance has been invoked, and now Japan will assist Britain by clearing the Kaiser's navy from the Pacific. Assist, of course, is a flexible word. As you step into the corridors of the Naval General Staff, the mood is electric. Maps of the Yellow Sea are spread across long tables, small wooden models marking cruisers and destroyers. Officers discuss weather, currents, and landing beaches with the precision of surgeons. Admiral Kamimura leans over the map, tapping one finger at a German-held peninsula. Kiaocho Bay. Qingdao, he says, the syllables sharp as gunfire. That is where we start. It's an odd alliance. Britain and Japan, partners against a European enemy, are bound by mutual interest rather than trust. British officers stationed in Hong Kong send lukewarm congratulations. One quips in his diary, "Our Japanese allies are efficient, but rather too eager to show it." You can't help but grin at that. Japan, after all, is the new student determined to outperform its Western tutors. Still, there's hesitation in Tokyo. The army is divided. General Yamagata, old and cautious, warns that a long campaign could drain resources better kept for defense. Others, younger and hungrier, insist this is Japan's chance to prove its global standing. Historians still argue whether the army truly believed in the alliance's ideals or merely in the spoils to be won. The truth, you suspect, lies somewhere in the middle, like most things in imperial politics. While admirals plan naval operations, the diplomats polish Japan's justification for war. "We act to ensure peace in the Orient," one pamphlet declares. The phrase sounds noble enough to make even the censors blush. It's hard not to notice that peace conveniently includes German leaseholds, railways, and a brewery famous for its pale lager, still bottled today under a different name. On a muggy August morning, you stand along the wharf at Ujina Port near Hiroshima as transports line up like metal whales. Soldiers in khaki file aboard, rifles glinting under the sun. Officers bark orders. Dock workers stack crates of rice, ammunition, and an improbable number of pickled plum jars. Overhead, the imperial flag ripples in the sea breeze, white, red, and faintly smug. Somewhere, a journalist scribbles that the Empire's adventure will be brief, honorable, and victorious. You've read enough history to know those three words rarely coexist. Farther south, British warships rendezvous with the Japanese fleet off Shimonoseki. The sight must have been extraordinary. Union Jacks and rising suns fluttering side by side. Sailors exchanging stiff salutes while trying not to stare too long at one another's uniforms. A quirky detail surfaces in one sailor's diary. He notes that Japanese officers preferred tea served in Western china cups, but with green tea, not black. The alliance, it seems, was an acquired taste. By early September, the combined forces steamed toward Shandong. You picture the horizon dotted with gray hulls, funnels belching smoke, and the rhythmic clang of engine pistons echoing through the fog. The Asama leads, flanked by the British cruiser Triumph. Overhead, seagulls scatter before the deep moan of foghorns. Japan's fleet, barely 40 years removed from wooden gunboats, now moves with the discipline and menace of any European armada. When they reach Qingdao, reconnaissance planes, fragile biplanes with canvas wings, circle overhead like curious dragonflies. The Germans, under Captain Meyer Waldeck, dig in for a siege. You can almost imagine their disbelief, being surrounded not by British Tommies, but by Japanese infantry singing martial hymns in a language they don't understand. Back in Tokyo, the Diet convenes in urgent session. Prime Minister Okuma faces opposition from conservatives who warn that the war could anger America, Germany's trading partner, and Japan's future rival. "We must not overreach," one elder insists. But the tide of public enthusiasm is impossible to stop. Newspaper boys shout headlines, and even small rural villages hold patriotic donation drives. Housewives contribute family heirlooms, gold hairpins, copper kettles, to support the troops. The empire hums like a giant engine running on national pride. As weeks pass, you begin to sense the delicate balancing act beneath all this fervor. Japan must appear loyal to Britain, but also independent. Too submissive, and the West will never take them seriously. Too assertive, and Britain might remember its own colonial paranoia. It's a diplomatic dance performed on a high wire, and one misstep could send the alliance tumbling. Meanwhile, German U-boats haunt the South China Sea. The Japanese Navy deploys destroyers to hunt them, and for the first time, Japanese officers find themselves coordinating signals, codes, and convoy routes with their British counterparts. Communication is patchy, but cooperation slowly improves. There's even a kind of mutual respect forming, thin as rice paper, but real. In a quieter corner of the story, a few Western observers marvel at how seamlessly Japan has mobilized. One American journalist writes that the precision of their logistics would shame a European general staff. Yet, he adds with a smirk, one still cannot buy a decent sandwich in Yokohama. You chuckle softly. Progress always leaves crumbs behind. Amid this martial rhythm, ordinary life continues. School children practice drills with wooden rifles. Tokyo's new trams rattle through neon-lit streets, carrying workers who barely understand where Shandong is. Even as the empire stretches outward, the hum of daily life, markets, temples, family dinners, anchors it in quiet normalcy. Then, one evening, you overhear two students debating outside the Imperial University. "Are we fighting for honor?" one asks, "or for profit?" His friend replies, "What's the difference if the world finally respects us?" That question hangs in the warm air long after they've gone. Historians later describe Japan's 1914 decision as a hinge point, a moment when ambition, insecurity, and opportunism fused into policy. To the Japanese public, it seemed straightforward. Join the Allies, defeat Germany, and gain respect. But to the men behind the curtains, it was also about testing how far Japan could stretch its influence before someone told it to stop. Night falls again over Tokyo Bay. Warships at anchor glow faintly beneath the lanterns strung along their decks. Officers sip sake and talk in low voices about honor and destiny. But you notice the tension beneath their smiles. They know that this war, sold to the people as a brief expedition, might open doors that can never be closed. A breeze stirs, carrying the faint scent of burning coal and blooming chrysanthemums. Somewhere, a gramophone plays a tinny Western waltz, its melody drifting across the water. You close your eyes and imagine the empire poised on the edge of transformation. No longer the isolated nation of shoguns and samurai, but not yet the global power it dreams of being. In a few weeks, the guns at Qingdao will thunder, and the world will learn that Japan's alliance is more than symbolic. But for now, under the quiet hum of Tokyo's night, the future balances like a blade on the horizon, sharp, bright, and waiting to be drawn. Dawn breaks over the yellow sea like a smoldering ember, red light spilling across the deck of your transport ship. You taste salt on your lips and coal smoke in your lungs as the fleet steams toward Shandong. Behind you, a trail of black exhaust curls into the wind, marking the Imperial Navy's path toward destiny. In the distance, the faint outline of the Chinese coast rises out of morning haze. Qingdao, the German fortress that has become Japan's first great prize of the war. You stand among thousands of soldiers crowded along the railings. faces eager, boots polished, rifles gleaming. The men are young, mostly farmers and clerks turned soldiers, each with a neat top knot tucked under a khaki cap. Some whisper prayers to the sea gods, others hum marching songs. An officer barks orders and, as one, the troops stiffen. The word passes down the line, landing imminent. You've arrived at the doorstep of Germany's Far Eastern Empire, where Europe's imperial ambitions collide with Asia's rising power. The irony isn't lost on you. Japan, once bullied by Western gunboats, now arrives with its own steel hulls and imperial dreams. As the transports anchor, the Japanese flag flutters in the breeze, its crimson circle mirrored by the rising sun itself. The fleet opens fire. Thunder rolls across the water, and shells arc through the sky like fiery comets. Plumes of smoke bloom along the coastline. The siege of Qingdao has begun. Onshore, German troops scramble behind sandbags and artillery positions. They're outnumbered 10-1, but determined. Their commander, Captain Alfred Meyer-Waldeck, is a stoic man with a Kaiser-style mustache and the stubbornness to match. His men, mostly German reservists, colonial marines, and a small group of Chinese laborers, hunker down inside the fortress, surrounded by barbed wire and minefields. One soldier writes in his diary, "The Japanese guns roar like thunder, and the earth shakes beneath our boots. We will not surrender, though the heavens fall." Historians still argue whether Qingdao mattered strategically. Militarily, it was a small outpost. Symbolically, it was everything. For Japan, it was proof that the empire could fight and win on the global stage. For Germany, it was a test of honor. For the watching world, it was the first real glimpse of how far Japan's ambitions might reach. Japanese and British troops coordinate their assault, though coordinate might be a generous term. The British commander, Brigadier General Barnardiston, complains privately that Japanese staff officers prefer to discuss rather than cooperate. The Japanese, in turn, grumble that the British talk more than they fight. It's like watching an awkward dance where both partners insist on leading. Still, under the pounding guns, the alliance holds. From the sea, Japanese destroyers fire broadsides into the fortress, while British gunboats provide covering fire. On land, engineers dig trenches. Yes, even here, on Asian soil, the war begins to resemble the grim stalemate forming in Europe. The smell of cordite and damp earth fills the air. You crouch beside a company of sappers working by lantern light, their faces smeared with sweat and dirt. They drive stakes into the mud, string telephone wires, and mutter about the iron mosquitoes, German machine guns, that chatter whenever anyone pokes their head above the parapet. Somewhere nearby, a soldier hums an old Edo-era tune about cherry blossoms falling at the height of beauty. You realize the metaphor is painfully apt. As the siege drags on, weather turns miserable. Rain floods the trenches, mixing with clay and blood. Japanese soldiers endure it stoically, chewing on cold rice balls and sharing cigarettes beneath makeshift tarps. A quirky little anecdote spreads among the troops. Some swear they've spotted German officers drinking beer during bombardments to toast our accuracy. The Japanese laugh, but secretly admire the enemy's composure. The Navy contributes too. Offshore, the armored cruiser Suwo and the dreadnought Kawachi keep up a relentless bombardment. Each salvo lights the horizon in flashes of orange, followed by the delayed rumble that shakes your chest. You feel the vibration through your boots, the percussion like a heartbeat of the empire itself. Then, late in October, something new streaks across the dawn sky. A biplane, its fragile frame wobbling in the wind. Japan's fledgling Air Corps has arrived. You tilt your head upward as the machine buzzes overhead, its observer leaning out with a camera clutched to his chest. Historians will later note that this marks Japan's first military use of aircraft in combat. One plane even drops small bombs made from converted artillery shells, more symbolic than effective. Still, the symbolism matters. Japan isn't just imitating Western warfare anymore, it's mastering it. Back in Tokyo, newspapers celebrate each day's progress. Headlines proclaim Imperial troops advance and German flags soon to fall, ignoring the reality that progress is slow and costly. The government spins the story well. Japan, loyal to her British ally, bringing order and justice to Asia. In private, however, the cabinet already drafts proposals for post-war possession of the territory. One memo even suggests turning Qingdao into a gateway for commerce under Japanese control, a polite euphemism for permanent occupation. After nearly 2 months of siege, the Germans are starving. Ammunition runs low, their water supply is tainted, and the fortress walls are cracked from constant shelling. On November 7, 1914, Japanese forces launched the final assault. You scramble forward through rain and mud as artillery fire lights up the ridge. The screams of shells drown out the wind. Amid the chaos, Japanese troops plant the rising sun flag atop captured trenches. When the white flag finally rises over Qingdao, cheers erupt along the Japanese line. The fortress falls. The German garrison surrenders. You stand among the victors watching smoke curl from the ruined city. Around 4,700 German and colonial soldiers march out, many wounded but proud. Japanese officers salute them, a rare gesture of respect between empires. And yet, beneath the jubilation, there's unease. Japan's triumph is clear, but so is its appetite. Britain quietly notes how swiftly Japan moved to occupy the surrounding territory, hoisting flags not only over Qingdao but over nearby railway stations and telegraph lines. The Kaiser's East Asian empire is gone, but Japan's is growing by the hour. In Tokyo, crowds celebrate under lanterns. Merchants sell victory sake, labeled with caricatures of the Kaiser's mustache. A few cynical students mutter that Asia's liberator has become Asia's landlord. You can't help but smile at the sarcasm. Even in victory, self-awareness leaks through. A more curious side note, one of the German prisoners taken at Qingdao, a musician named Karl Wilhelm, forms a camp orchestra during internment in Japan. His little ensemble will go on to perform Beethoven for curious Japanese audiences, the start of Japan's enduring love affair with German classical music. Strange how war sometimes seeds beauty amid ruin. As winter rolls in, the empire basks in glory. The emperor issues a rescript praising the valor of his soldiers. School children memorize it word for word. Newspapers call it Japan's coming of age. For the first time, the West must acknowledge Japan as a power that can take and hold colonies like any European state. But not everyone is pleased. In China, the fall of Qingdao feels like a betrayal. The land may have been German, but it was still Chinese soil. One foreign master replaces another, a Beijing editorial laments. You can feel the bitterness stirring, the first ripples of resentment that will, decades later, swell into something far darker. Historians still debate the true legacy of Qingdao. Was it a demonstration of Japan's loyalty to the Allies, or the first taste of expansionism that would define its future? You glance back at the ruined fortress and wonder if the world even realizes what door has just been opened. The guns fall silent. Snow begins to drift over the shattered walls, softening the scars of battle. Japanese soldiers light small fires, boiling tea in dented kettles. Steam rises into the cold air, mingling with the smoke of burned-out trenches. You take a sip and feel the warmth spread through your chest. The siege is over. The empire stands triumphant, and the rising sun climbs higher, casting long shadows that stretch toward the Pacific, toward the islands and ambitions that still wait beyond the horizon. The smoke from Qingdao hasn't even cleared when your next voyage begins. The war in Europe is devouring men by the millions, but out here, across the Pacific, Japan's navy hums like a hive of restless steel. The ink on the victory reports is barely dry when new orders arrive. Seize the German islands scattered across Micronesia. You lean over the railing of a cruiser as the engines roar to life. Your next campaign will be fought among coral atolls, turquoise lagoons, and the humid silence of the equatorial sea. These are the so-called Islands of the Kaiser. The Marshalls, the Carolines, the Marianas. Tiny specks on the map that few in Europe could even find, yet each with a radio station, a coaling depot, or a strip of land long enough for an airfield. To Berlin, they were colonial trophies. To Tokyo, they're stepping stones. Whoever holds the islands, an admiral says, holds the gate to the Pacific. You sail under skies so blue, they almost look painted. The cruiser's deck shimmers with heat, and sailors in white uniforms fan themselves with scraps of old newspapers. A mess boy offers you rice and pickled radish wrapped in seaweed. It's cold, chewy, and somehow comforting amid the monotony of open sea. Nearby, a group of gunners polish brass shells until they gleam. They joke that the Germans might be too sunburned to fight back. Everyone laughs. No one expects resistance. They're right. Most of these islands are barely defended. Small garrisons, radio technicians, a handful of administrators who probably haven't heard that war's been declared. When the Japanese fleet appears on the horizon, most simply surrender. The conquests are bloodless, but the symbolism is enormous. For the first time, Japan's flag flies across the vast sweep of Micronesia, territory that arcs from the equator to within striking distance of Australia. At Saipan, you watch Marines wade ashore through waist-deep surf, rifles slung across their backs. Children peek from bamboo huts as officers raise the rising sun flag. In one village, a bewildered German trader hands over his ledger, muttering in fractured Japanese, "Business kaput." The Marines grin, politely bow, and continue planting flags. The island falls without a shot. Aboard the cruiser Tokiwa, the radio crackles with updates. One message reads, "Truck captured, no resistance." Another, "Yap under control, wireless station intact." The Navy marks each new acquisition with quiet efficiency. Officers gather in the wardroom, sipping sake mixed with British gin. A curious hybrid of cultures born from alliance and convenience. One quips, "We are collecting postcards for the Emperor." You chuckle softly. It's hard to deny the absurdity. A war half a world away, yet here you are annexing paradise. Historians still argue whether Japan acted purely under Allied orders or from its own expansionist instincts. The truth, as usual, is both. Britain had asked Japan to neutralize the German fleet, specifically Admiral von Spee's East Asia Squadron. But the islands? That was never explicitly discussed. The Japanese Navy simply secured them for operational purposes and then decided, conveniently, to keep them. From London's perspective, this is awkward. The Admiralty can hardly scold its only reliable Asian ally in the middle of a world war, but private memos reveal unease. One British officer writes, "The Japanese are remarkably quick at taking charge of things which we did not request them to." You can almost hear the polite teeth grinding across the cables. Still, public statements remain cordial. The British press praises Japan's gallant actions in the Pacific. In Tokyo, the alliance is celebrated like a marriage of equals. Posters depict Britannia and the rising sun shaking hands over a map of the Pacific, waves cresting at their feet. The irony? Each hand hides a knife behind its back. As the fleet continues its island hopping, you notice subtle changes. The Japanese officers begin taking detailed notes about harbors, anchorages, and freshwater sources. Survey teams sketch the reefs with obsessive precision. You realize this isn't just wartime housekeeping, it's long-term planning. Each island is a potential fortress in embryo. One afternoon, you land on Jaluit Atoll in the Marshalls. The air smells of salt and coconut husk. Palm trees sway lazily while crabs scuttle through the shallows. A Japanese ensign plants a wooden sign reading, "Under Imperial Protection." The phrase sounds gentle, almost paternal. You suspect the locals won't find it so comforting in years to come. Among the quirks of this campaign, Japanese sailors develop a fondness for tinned German coffee found in abandoned stores. They drink it ceremoniously each morning, toasting their invisible enemies. To efficiency, one laughs. The Germans may lose colonies, but they make excellent coffee. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, American newspapers start to pay attention. The New York Times wonders aloud whether Japan intends to retain these far-flung prizes. Washington sends polite inquiries through diplomatic channels. Tokyo's reply is vague, wrapped in elegant ambiguity. All occupations are temporary and in accordance with Allied strategy, which, in diplomatic code, means yes, but we'll see. Back home, the public cheers every victory. School children paste paper suns over maps of the Pacific. Merchants print postcards of sailors lounging under palm trees, captioned, "Guardians of the Southern Seas." The empire is growing faster than anyone imagined. Even so, a few cautious voices warn of overreach. The novelist Natsume Soseki writes, "When one swells too fast, one forgets the pain of stretching." You can almost hear his sigh in every sentence. Yet for now, the expansion feels effortless. Japan's navy patrols from Singapore to Hawaii, its ships sleek and confident. For an empire that once feared Western domination, the reversal is intoxicating. You overhear a young lieutenant on deck whisper, "Soon, no foreign fleet will dare cross these waters without our permission." The ambition is breathtaking and a little frightening. Historians later call this moment Japan's Pacific Awakening. You feel it in the air, the shift from regional power to global contender. The islands Japan now occupies will, decades later, become battlefields with names etched into the world's memory: Saipan, Truk, Palau. But in 1914, they are trophies, peaceful, sun-drenched, and deceptively harmless. As the cruiser heads north again, the sailors gather on deck for evening ceremony. The horizon blazes orange, the ocean turning to molten gold. The chaplain reads a brief prayer for the souls lost in battle, though, truthfully, very few have died here. The real battles are still to come, fought not with rifles, but with treaties and resentment. In the wardroom, officers discuss the next step. "We should offer to protect Australia's trade routes," one suggests. Another counters, "The British will never allow it. They fear our navy as much as they need it." You can tell that beneath the surface cooperation, rivalries are already fermenting. By the end of 1914, Japan controls an empire stretching farther than it ever has before. From Korea and Manchuria in the north to Micronesia in the south, the empire spans thousands of miles of ocean. When you trace it on the map, it looks almost like a ring encircling the Pacific, a ring of ambition drawn in saltwater and ink. Still, not everyone celebrates. In Beijing, diplomats fume at the violation of Chinese sovereignty. They drive out Germans only to replace them with themselves, one says bitterly. Across the Pacific, American naval officers begin drawing contingency plans for a possible future adversary in the Pacific. You shiver, realizing how fast allies can become rivals. Historians still debate how conscious Japan was of that coming friction. Some argue that Tokyo merely sought parity and respect from the West. Others claim the seeds of later militarism were already sprouting. Watching the fleet steam home through sunset haze, you're not sure which to believe. The faces of the sailors, young, proud, unaware, offer no answer. As night falls, you hear the rhythmic clang of the ship's bell, the murmur of the watch changing shifts. Above you, the stars burn fiercely. Cassiopeia, Orion, the Southern Cross, all glimmering over an empire that believes its time has come. You close your eyes, the engines thrum vibrating through the deck, and for a moment, you drift between the scent of salt and the echo of destiny. The year turns to 1915, and you find yourself back at Yokosuka as the great ships return home. Their hulls gleam with salt streaks and triumph. Their decks are heavy with the weight of trophies and new confidence. The war may be raging across Europe's fields, but here in Japan, there's a strange calm, an almost smug assurance that this is the Empire's moment to shine. Yet the admirals are restless. They've conquered islands and seized a fortress. But to prove Japan's worth to the Allies, the Navy must do more than collect postcards from the Pacific. So begins Japan's self-appointed role as the guardian of the seas. You're aboard the cruiser Yakumo now, the wind slicing past your ears as the ship cuts through the South China Sea. Her guns are silent, her crew precise to the point of choreography. Japan's fleet has grown so efficient that even the Royal Navy begins to take notice. Admiral Sturdy cables Tokyo with praise for the professionalism and energy of our Japanese allies. It's faintly patronizing praise, but the Japanese take it as a badge of legitimacy. You watch destroyers fan out across the horizon, sleek, fast, and hungry for glory. Their mission? To hunt down any remnants of Germany's East Asia Squadron, commanded by the elusive Admiral von Spee. The German fleet has vanished into the Pacific, raiding Allied shipping and sowing panic across the sea lanes. The Japanese call this the invisible chase. Historians still argue whether Japan truly expected to find von Spee or simply wanted to appear indispensable. Either way, the Navy expands its patrol zones from the Indian Ocean to the Central Pacific. You see the vastness of it firsthand. Long, lonely patrols under the blinding sun. The sea as empty as a sheet of glass. Days stretch into weeks, punctuated only by the sharp clang of bells and the occasional cry of "smoke on the horizon," which always turns out to be a fishing junk or a mirage. The monotony breeds superstition. Sailors begin carrying little charms, bits of coral, photos of Mount Fuji, even tiny origami cranes tucked into their caps. One evening, a chief petty officer swears he sees a ghostly German cruiser pass in the moonlight. The next morning, the men find an old barrel floating nearby, stamped Kaiserliche Marine. The label is faded, but it sends a shiver through the crew. Proof the enemy watches us, someone mutters. Yet the enemy's long gone. Von Spee's squadron will meet its end thousands of miles away at the Battle of the Falklands, destroyed by the British in December 1914. But news travels slowly across oceans, and for months, Japanese ships continue to prowl the seas, searching for phantoms. While the Navy patrols, Japan's merchant fleet booms. Allied shipping losses create opportunities, and Japanese companies step in eagerly. You pass through bustling ports, Singapore, Manila, Bombay, where Japanese freighters now load rice, coal, and raw materials bound for Allied armies. Silk, copper, and munitions flow the other way. Each crate carries not just cargo, but a quiet message. Japan is indispensable. The Empire's factories thrum day and night, their chimneys smudging the winter sky. The rhythmic pounding of shipyards echoes through Yokohama. Sparks fly from Osaka's foundries. You can almost smell the iron and sweat of the new industrial age. Wartime demand has turned Japan into an export powerhouse, and its economy begins to roar. While Europe burns, one Osaka banker boasts, "We forge our destiny." A curious footnote. The Japanese Navy adopts a number of stray British traditions. Tea at 4, toast with marmalade, even cricket on deck, played awkwardly, with too much enthusiasm and too little accuracy. You chuckle as a young officer swings at a ball and sends it flying overboard. First lost wicket in the South China Sea, someone jokes. Still, cooperation with the British isn't all tea and games. Beneath the surface, tension simmers. The Royal Navy views the Japanese with a mix of admiration and wariness, while the Japanese officers privately resent the condescension. One British commander describes his counterparts as polite, efficient, and exceedingly dangerous when underestimated. You decide that might be the most accurate summary of the entire alliance. Meanwhile, at home, newspapers print glowing reports of our Navy's guardian angels. public imagination turns the destroyers into mythic protectors, modern samurai patrolling the ocean. A poem published in Asahi Shimbun reads, "Beneath the moon, the rising sun glides, her guns asleep, her honor awake." The Empire loves that kind of imagery, serenity masking steel. In early 1915, a new order arrives. Japan is to assist in protecting Allied merchant convoys in the Indian Ocean. The assignment is partly symbolic, partly practical. The British Empire's lifelines stretch from the Suez Canal to Singapore, and German raiders are still prowling the waters. Japan's contribution will keep those arteries flowing. You travel aboard the destroyer Sakaki, a small, nimble vessel with a crew that runs on caffeine and sheer stubbornness. The Indian Ocean is a furnace. Salt crusts your uniform. The sun beats down like a hammer. The sailors strip to their waists, their skin bronzed to the color of teak. Every few hours, they hose the deck down just to keep it cool enough to walk on. When night falls, the air turns velvet black. You stand at the bow, watching phosphorescent plankton light up the wake like drifting stars. Somewhere out there, submarines lurk. Every shadow feels alive. The captain paces the bridge, pipe clenched between his teeth, muttering, "The enemy sleeps beneath our feet." It's not poetry, it's sonarless paranoia. Then, one dawn, the wireless crackles. Enemy submarines sighted near Penang. The Sakaki and her sister ships race toward the coordinates. You grip the railing as the engines roar. Minutes later, an oil slick appears, proof of a kill. The crew erupts in cheers. Whether they actually sank a U-boat or just scared it off doesn't matter. The Empire will celebrate another victory of the rising sun over the darkness below. Back in Britain, newspapers grudgingly acknowledge Japan's effectiveness. The Times praises our Eastern allies' steadfast vigilance. It's faint praise, but it makes headlines in Tokyo. Japan's diplomats highlight every compliment, knowing reputation is worth more than gold. By late 1916, Japan's ships have patrolled from the Pacific to the Red Sea. They've escorted troop ships, hunted raiders, and rescued survivors of torpedoed freighters. The Empire's navy, once dismissed as a regional force, now operates across half the globe. For the sailors, it's exhausting but exhilarating. They swap stories of foreign ports, exotic foods, and the strange customs of their British comrades. One particularly odd exchange occurs in Singapore when British sailors teach their Japanese counterparts to swear in English. The Japanese, ever polite, thank them and immediately begin using the phrases incorrectly. "Oh, magnificent buggering morning" becomes the crew's favorite greeting. The officers pretend not to notice. Amid the humor and heat, you can feel something deeper changing. Japan's sailors no longer see themselves as imitators of Western power. They see themselves as equals, perhaps even future competitors. On moonless nights, you overhear whispers on deck. If we can protect Britain's empire, why should we not one day protect our own? The thought lingers like smoke. Historians still argue whether the seeds of Japan's later naval ambitions were planted here during these endless patrols. What's certain is that the sea gave Japan confidence, a taste of global reach it would never forget. When you finally return to Yokosuka, the docks are festooned with banners. "Welcome home, guardians of the empire." The crowds cheer, school children wave flags, and old veterans bow as the ships glide into harbor. The air smells of salt, diesel, and pride. The sailors disembark, thinner and darker than when they left, but their eyes shine. The Empire's newspapers hail them as heroes. The Emperor awards decorations, and in the quiet corners of Tokyo's bars, officers begin sketching ideas for a future navy, one that will never again play second to Britain or anyone else. You sip your drink, listening to the low hum of conversation. Outside, the tide laps gently against the quay. The war in Europe shows no sign of ending. But here in Japan, the ocean feels smaller, and the Empire's dreams feel bigger than ever. The sun beats down on the harbor at Yokohama, and you stand once again amid the tangle of rigging, wireless masts, and brass fittings that define Japan's restless navy. This time though, your ship isn't heading for the familiar waters of the Pacific or the Indian Ocean. No, your destination lies halfway across the world, beyond the Suez Canal and the dark blue coasts of Africa, the Mediterranean Sea. It sounds absurd at first. Japanese destroyers sailing in Europe's ancient sea, patrolling between Malta and Marseille. But that's exactly what happens. By 1917, the Great War has devoured so many Allied ships that Britain, desperate for help, turns to its eastern ally once again. German U-boats are strangling supply routes, sinking troop transports by the dozens. Send us destroyers, London pleads, and sailors who still have the will to fight. Tokyo agrees. It's not just altruism, it's strategy. Each act of assistance tightens Japan's claim to global respect. You can almost hear the cabinet's reasoning. We prove ourselves indispensable, and no one can treat us as second class again. So begins one of the most far-flung naval expeditions in Japan's history. 1. You're aboard the destroyer Sakaki, now refitted for the long voyage west. Her decks are stacked with crates of rice, barrels of fresh water, and spare parts for engines that will soon roar across 12,000 miles of ocean. As the ship departs Sasebo in early 1917, sailors crowd the rails, waving to families on the dock. The air smells of diesel and farewells. The fleet slips out through the East China Sea, heading towards Singapore, then Ceylon, the Red Sea, and finally the Mediterranean, a slow pilgrimage through the arteries of empire. Weeks later, when you reach Malta, it feels like landing on another planet. Limestone cliffs, cathedrals shimmering under the sun, British officers in khaki sweating through their uniforms. The Japanese destroyers, sleek, efficient, painted in ghostly gray, pull into the harbor like visiting spirits. Curious locals gather on the quay to watch. They've come from the other end of the world, someone whispers. At first, the British crews are skeptical. Fine sailors, no doubt, one officer mutters, but can they handle the Med? It doesn't take long for them to find out. Barely a week after arrival, the Japanese flotilla is dispatched to escort Allied convoys from Malta to Marseille. It's dangerous work. German U-boats prowl these waters, and every ripple could hide a periscope. The destroyers move in tight formation, their lookouts scanning the sea with binoculars glued to sunburned faces. The Mediterranean heat is suffocating. Salt crusts the rails like frost. Then it happens. Late May 1917, the British troopship SS Transylvania plows through the choppy waters off Cape Vado, Italy. Suddenly, a streak of white cuts across the bow, a torpedo. The explosion rips through the hull. Chaos erupts. More than 3,000 men are thrown into the sea, screaming, clinging to wreckage. You're nearby aboard the Japanese destroyer Matsu, and without waiting for orders, the captain swings the helm hard over. "Full speed ahead," he shouts. The crew leaps into action, tossing ropes, lifeboats, even wooden planks to the men thrashing in the water. The Matsu and her sister ship Sakaki pluck more than 3,000 survivors from the waves. Only 300 perish. When the last man is hauled aboard, dripping and trembling, one British officer mutters in disbelief, "Those little Japanese saved us all." Word spreads fast. Newspapers in London and Rome hail the heroic allies from the East. A British admiral, none other than Gerald Charles Dickens, great-grandson of the novelist, writes in his report, "Whereas the Italians are inefficient, the French unreliable, the Greeks out of the calculation, and the Americans too far away, the Japanese are excellent, but small in number." It's faint praise, but praise nonetheless. You can almost see the pride ripple through the ranks back in Tokyo. Yet the Mediterranean is not kind to all who serve there. Just weeks after the rescue, Sakaki herself is torpedoed by a German submarine near Crete. The blast rips open her bow and kills 67 men. You can still hear the echo of that explosion in the captain's hollow voice as he radios for help. "We will not sink," he insists. "Not while the flag still flies." Somehow, the crippled ship limps back to port. Historians still argue whether this Mediterranean deployment was militarily significant or merely symbolic. Strategically, Japan's flotilla could not change the balance of power, but symbolically, it did what the diplomats back home wanted. It made Japan visible, indispensable, and courageous. The sailors themselves don't care much for symbolism. To them, it's the endless rhythm of escort duty that defines life here. Dawn patrols, submarine sightings, meals of cold rice and tinned beef, nights broken by alarms that turn out to be dolphins or floating barrels. In Malta's dockyards, the Japanese mingle with British, French, and Italian crews. There are language barriers, but camaraderie comes easily when you've all stared down torpedo wakes. On weekends, the sailors explore Valletta's narrow streets, where shopkeepers quickly learn to sell sake alongside rum. One Maltese inn even hangs a sign reading, "Welcome, Sons of the Rising Sun, tea, wine, and safety from the Huns." A quirky tidbit emerges from these days. Japanese sailors, accustomed to removing shoes indoors, scandalize local bartenders by leaving their boots neatly at the pub entrance before drinking. The British find it hilarious. The Maltese find it charming. Still, beneath the cheerful exchanges, there's an undercurrent of mutual curiosity and perhaps unease. Western officers can't quite decide what to make of Japan, a nation that dresses like Europe, fights like Europe, yet speaks of destiny and emperor worship with a conviction that feels alien. Polite, one admiral notes, but unknowable. You, standing on the deck beneath the glittering Mediterranean stars, can feel that ambiguity like a second skin. Japan is proving itself to the world, but also learning from it, absorbing tactics, radio codes, even the swagger of Western command. The empire's navy grows not just in size, but in confidence. At night, the Mediterranean glows with moonlight, its surface silver as silk. The destroyers glide silently, their engines a soft hum. Somewhere out there, beneath the waves, a U-boat captain watches through his periscope and hesitates. He's heard of these Japanese escorts, their sharp eyes, their ruthless efficiency. Maybe tonight, he decides, isn't the night to strike. When the war finally ends in 1918, the Japanese flotilla has escorted over 700 Allied ships, rescued countless survivors, and earned commendations from every corner of the Allied command. You can imagine the scene in Tokyo when the sailors return. Parades, speeches, school children waving flags. The emperor's message praises their valor across the 7 seas. Yet, as you listen to the drums and cheers, you sense a subtle irony. Japan has proven itself as an equal partner to the West, yet equality still feels out of reach. The same diplomats who smile and clap at the parades will soon sit in Paris and remind Japan that gratitude does not imply privilege. But that's a story for later. For now, the Mediterranean sun dips below the horizon. The fleet that once chased ghosts across the Pacific has circled the globe and come home changed. The sailors step onto Japanese soil with medals on their chests and foreign salt still in their hair. The empire, it seems, has learned a dangerous lesson. The world is smaller than it looks, and Japan's reach can stretch farther than anyone imagined. You watch the harbor lights flicker across the bay and realize Japan's journey through this war is far from over. It's only learned how to sail farther, fight longer, and expect more. The waves lap softly against the dock, whispering of all the oceans yet to come. You wake to the clatter of carriage wheels outside Tokyo Station, the air thick with coal smoke and winter drizzle. The war in Europe is dragging into its 4th year, and Japan, flush with victory and prestige, now turns its gaze inland. The Navy has done its part. Now the diplomats and politicians prepare to claim their share. Yet what happens next is not fought with guns or ships, but with paper, ink, and veiled threats. It begins with a telegram, drafted in the foreign ministry. Its message so audacious, it almost feels like a prank. 21 demands to the Chinese government, the header reads. You trace the list with your finger. Control of Shandong, extended leases in Manchuria, influence over Chinese railways, even the right to station Japanese advisors inside China's government. You blink. It's not diplomacy. It's daylight extortion dressed in formal calligraphy. Outside, rickshaw drivers splash through puddles, oblivious that this document could reshape Asia. The war has distracted the Western powers. Their ambassadors too busy watching France burn to notice what Japan is doing in their backyard. For Tokyo, that's the opportunity of a lifetime. While the tigers fight in the West, Foreign Minister Kato Takaaki says, we hunt quietly in the bamboo. You imagine the scene in Beijing. President Yuan Shikai, the aging warlord who once dreamed of crowning himself emperor, now pale with fury as he reads Japan's ultimatum. His aides whisper frantically, how can China resist? The Allies are distracted. The United States remains neutral, and Japan's army, battle-tested and close at hand, waits just across the sea. Historians still argue whether the 21 demands were a masterstroke or a blunder. On paper, they would make China little more than a Japanese protectorate. In practice, they unite almost everyone against Japan. The negotiations drag on for months. You can picture the embassy drawing rooms, heavy curtains drawn, translators sweating as each clause is debated. Japan's delegates insist their intentions are benevolent. UN's ministers fume quietly, pretending to consider while buying time. In Tokyo, newspapers proclaim that Asia will rise under Japan's guidance. In Beijing, anonymous pamphlets whisper, Asia will suffocate under Japan's hand. By May 1915, China caves, at least partially. 15 of the 21 demands are accepted. Japan secures new mining rights in Shandong, leases in Manchuria, and economic control of key railways. The most insulting clauses, the ones demanding political control, are withdrawn under pressure from Britain and the United States. Still, the message is clear. Japan has tasted how it feels to twist another nation's arm. You sit in a tea house overlooking the Imperial Palace moat as the news breaks. Patrons murmur approval. Businessmen toast the triumph of East Asia. But outside, students gather in silent protest. A group of them holds up banners that read, "Respect China's sovereignty." It's a rare moment of dissent, swiftly hushed by police. A quirky anecdote emerges. The foreign ministry originally planned to deliver the demands on Chinese New Year, believing the date auspicious. Only later did someone point out that presenting an ultimatum during a festival of renewal might look, well, rude. They delayed it by a week, proof that even imperial ambition occasionally defers to etiquette. Still, the diplomatic earthquake shakes the region. In China, anti-Japanese sentiment explodes. Boycotts sweep through the cities. Shopkeepers refuse Japanese goods. Students burn Japanese flags. One Beijing newspaper warns, "The Japanese smile hides a bayonet." You can almost feel the resentment curdling across Asia. In Washington, alarm bells ring. President Woodrow Wilson, ever the moralist, frowns at Tokyo's behavior. Equality among nations, he insists, must apply to all. Of course, Wilson's own government isn't above imperial hypocrisy, but his words mark a shift. From this point on, the United States begins to watch Japan not as an ally, but as a rival. Back in Tokyo, the cabinet celebrates its victory. Prime Minister Okuma hosts a banquet at the Imperial Hotel. You can almost smell the lacquered floors and imported whiskey. Yet even as toasts are raised, unease lingers. Some elder statesmen worry the move has overplayed Japan's hand. Admiral Sato mutters to a colleague, "We've won a province and lost a continent." He isn't wrong. The 21 demands expose Japan's greatest paradox. It craves recognition from the West while imitating the West's worst habits. You see it in the architecture rising around you. European facades built over tatami floors, Parisian cafes serving green tea. The empire is caught between two worlds, unsure whether it wants to join the imperial club or replace it. Historians still debate whether the demands were driven by opportunism or ideology. Some claim Japan sought security in an unstable China. Others argue it was the first clear expression of Pan-Asian imperialism. Perhaps it was both, a mixture of fear and arrogance. Meanwhile, the streets of Tokyo pulse with a strange energy. The war in Europe continues to enrich Japan. Factories roar, exports surge, the yen strengthens. Yet, under the surface, the moral cost begins to gnaw. A young writer named Ryunosuke Akutagawa pens a short story about a man who sells his shadow for power. Readers recognize the metaphor immediately. In the Diet, opposition politicians grow bold enough to criticize the government's heavy hand. "We act like Britain," one says, "but forget we once hated to be treated like China." His speech is struck from the record. Still, it circulates privately, copied and shared in university dormitories. A curious side effect of Japan's assertiveness? Domestic pride soars. Patriotic songs flood the radio. Schools drill children in Asia for the Asiatics, and companies rename products with imperial flair. There's even a popular candy marketed as Shandong caramel, sweet, chewy, and vaguely imperialistic. You can't decide if it's clever branding or dark comedy. Yet beyond the propaganda, cracks widen. The West begins to see Japan as less of a loyal ally and more of an ambitious rival. British diplomats whisper about the Japanese question. The French, busy dying in trenches, shrug and mutter, "At least it's not our problem." But in America, editorial cartoons already depict Japan as a coiled dragon, its claws stretching across the Pacific. As spring turns to summer, the war abroad grinds on. Verdun bleeds. The Somme drowns in mud. And from this distance, Japan's imperial games seem almost detached from the horror. You sit in the garden of a Kyoto inn, listening to cicadas drone, and wonder how long this fragile balance can hold. The empire is richer, stronger, prouder, but also lonelier. The 21 demands, signed under duress, have poisoned Japan's relations with its neighbors. What should have been a diplomatic triumph leaves behind only suspicion and resentment. Even some Japanese newspapers start asking whether the empire's pursuit of respect has cost it something far more valuable: trust. Night falls over Tokyo. Lanterns reflect in the moat, glowing red like floating suns. You hear the faint sound of a street singer somewhere, his voice rasping through the humid air. The tide brings glory, the tide brings shame. Which one returns when the dawn comes again? You smile sadly. The empire won't answer that question tonight. For now, its ministers are content to sip sake, count profits, and imagine themselves masters of Asia. But across the Yellow Sea, a wounded China remembers, and resentment, like empire, has a long memory. You wake to the hiss of steam whistles and the clang of hammers, the sound of a nation working itself into a frenzy of productivity. The war in Europe is still raging, but for Japan, 1916 feels like a golden year. The arsenals of Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya run day and night, their smokestacks painting the sky a permanent gray. From the wharves of Kobe to the textile mills of Yokohama, the empire hums with the rhythm of prosperity. You walk through a factory floor at dawn, the air thick with oil and iron dust. Sparks leap from furnaces as women in blue work smocks feed sheets of steel into stamping machines. They sing softly to keep time, voices nearly drowned by the noise of progress. Each crate stamped "for export" might be bound for Calcutta, Vancouver, or Vladivostok. The war has turned Japan into a manufacturing giant. Historians still argue whether this boom was deliberate strategy or sheer luck. When Europe went to war, the factories of Britain and France shifted to producing weapons, leaving global markets starved for everything else: silk, textiles, ships, tools. Japan stepped in like a shopkeeper who had been waiting for his competitors to take a long lunch break, and business, as they say, is booming. Exports triple between 1914 and 1918. Silk is the empire's golden thread. Nearly half of Japan's export income comes from it. American women wear kimonos of Japanese silk. French tailors, cut off from China, turn to Tokyo for their fabric. Meanwhile, shipyards crank out freighters to replace Allied vessels lost to German submarines. The empire's merchant fleet, once modest, now stretches across the globe. You wander through Kobe Harbor, where new ships line the docks like steel whales. Each launch is a festival, crowds cheering, priests blessing hulls with branches of sacred sakaki, bands playing Kimigayo. The workers pose proudly for photographs, their faces smeared with grease and pride. There's a strange satisfaction in building something that moves the world, even if it moves the world toward war. But not everyone is celebrating. Inflation rises faster than wages. Rice, the heart of every meal, doubles in price. You visit a marketplace in Tokyo's Asakusa district and watch housewives argue with merchants. The emperor may win battles, one says bitterly, but he cannot buy rice. A year later, that anger will erupt into the rice riots of 1918. But for now, it simmers quietly, hidden beneath patriotic headlines. Back in the Diet, politicians debate what to do with this sudden wealth. The liberals argue for social reform, schools, roads, sanitation. The militarists argue for more ships, more guns, and more colonies. Guess which side wins? Budgets for the Navy and Army balloon. New warships are laid down, cruisers named after mountains and rivers, as if to remind the people that the empire's strength flows from its homeland. A quirky tidbit emerges. With British imports cut off, Tokyo's confectioners start producing chocolate locally for the first time. The candy becomes so popular that Japanese soldiers begin carrying bars in their rations. You imagine the irony, sweet taste of Western luxury, wrapped in imperial ambition. Meanwhile, business tycoons rise like volcanic islands. The Zaibatsu, family-run conglomerates like Mitsui, Mitsubishi, and Sumitomo, dominate everything from shipping to finance. You sit in a smoky Ginza cafe and overhear two bankers bragging about their profits. One lifts his glass and says, "Europe's tragedy is Japan's dividend." You nearly choke on your tea. The government is no less opportunistic. With Allied powers desperate for supplies, Japan dictates its own prices. Arms, coal, ships, all sold at a premium. A British diplomat writes home complaining, "The Japanese seem intent on winning a second fortune from our misfortunes." He isn't wrong. By 1918, Japan has replaced Germany as East Asia's leading industrial supplier and holds vast foreign reserves. Yet wealth brings new anxieties. Urban life swells. The streets of Osaka and Tokyo fill with trams, neon lights, and factory smoke. Jazz records from America blare from gramophones. The young generation calls itself Taisho Seinen, children of the Taisho era, daring, westernized, restless. They wear fedoras instead of kimonos, drink imported whiskey, and talk about freedom as though it's a new brand of perfume. But you sense the contradictions building beneath the surface. The workers in the mills and the miners in Kyushu aren't tasting the same prosperity as the owners in Tokyo. Labor strikes begin to spread, nothing dramatic yet, but enough to unsettle the elite. The government quietly passes laws allowing police to break subversive gatherings. They justify it as maintaining harmony. Historians still debate whether this moment, the wartime boom of 1916 to 1918, was Japan's first step toward modern capitalism or its rehearsal for militarized autarky. The numbers are dazzling, but the philosophy is still feudal: discipline, obedience, and profit in service of the emperor. Meanwhile, rural Japan watches from afar. You visit a fishing village on the coast of Shikoku and find it half empty. The young men have gone to work in shipyards or to fight in China. The elderly mend nets in silence. The village shrine, once bright with offerings, looks neglected. An old woman tells you softly, "The sea brings wealth to Tokyo, but only ghosts to us." There's another strange phenomenon sweeping the country. Moga, modern girls. They stroll through department stores in short skirts and bobbed hair, shocking the old guard. Magazines print photos of them sipping coffee and reading English novels. Corruption of the West, conservative editors cry. But you can't help noticing that for every critic, there's a crowd of curious admirers. Prosperity has made Japan not only richer, but also more complex, half samurai, half stockbroker. Internationally, Japan's economic ascent draws both admiration and suspicion. Britain hails its industrious ally. The United States, however, begins to worry about competition. American businessmen grumble that Japanese textiles are undercutting prices in Manila and Honolulu. They work harder, one says, and expect less. You hear pride in his complaint, and fear too. By 1917, Japan's export economy is running so hot that even small coastal towns sprout factories overnight. Silk looms clatter through the night. The smell of dye and smoke replaces that of pine and salt. Train stations overflow with workers commuting to cities that can barely house them. The war, somewhere far away, has turned Japan's islands into the beating heart of industrial Asia. And yet, beneath the clamor, an unease lingers. You see it in the eyes of the workers leaving the mills, tired, hollow, uncertain whether this prosperity belongs to them. The empire feels unstoppable, but it also feels brittle, as though one bad harvest, one price crash, one diplomatic insult could crack it wide open. In the newspapers, the headlines tell a story of endless triumph. Exports at record high. Japan, the arsenal of the East. But in the editorials, more thoughtful voices whisper warnings. We are becoming rich, one journalist writes, but not wise. You close your newspaper and step out into the crowded streets. Neon lights buzz overhead, and in the distance you hear a factory whistle wail into the night. The sound is triumphant, but it carries a faint echo of exhaustion. Japan's economy has multiplied. Its ambitions have grown. Its people are tasting modernity for the first time. But prosperity has a way of stirring hunger, not satisfaction. You look up at the dark sky above Tokyo, the same sky under which the empire dreams, and you wonder if all this light is the beginning of dawn or the flare before a storm. You sit in a quiet corner of the Imperial Hotel, the same one where Prime Minister Okuma once toasted Japan's rise. Outside, the clamor of modern Tokyo hums, a city of trams, electric lamps, and typewriters clacking through the night. Inside, diplomats murmur over brandy, voices low, laughter brittle. The war in Europe is nearing its end, and everyone here knows that Japan's next battle will be fought not on the seas, but at the negotiating tables of Paris. The empire's new diplomats have replaced swords with fountain pens, but they wield them like weapons. Men like Makino Nobuaki and Saionji Kinmochi polish their French phrases, rehearsing the delicate blend of flattery and firmness that diplomacy demands. Japan is no longer the apprentice power of the 1900s. It's a creditor nation now, sitting on piles of gold and prestige. The cabinet is determined to cash in that credibility for global influence. And yet, as you listen to the chatter in the hotel lobby, you sense how uneasy the mood is beneath the surface. Japan has played its part in the Allied cause, capturing German territories, patrolling oceans, rescuing Allied ships. But when the world's great powers look toward peace, their gaze drifts westward. London, Paris, Washington. They see each other as equals. Tokyo remains the polite afterthought. Recognition, one diplomat mutters into his drink, costs more than victory. The question is, how much Japan is willing to pay for it. As the guns thunder their final salvos in Europe, Japan prepares its diplomatic arsenal. You watch crates of documents loaded onto ships bound for France, reports on war contributions, naval missions, the seizure of Pacific Islands, and, most sensitive of all, the 21 demands. Tokyo knows the West will scrutinize those, but it also knows that possession is 9/10 of legitimacy. By 1918, Japan has positioned itself as both benefactor and opportunist. It supplies the Allies with weapons and steel, but it also uses the chaos to tighten its grip on China. When Russian revolutionaries seize Vladivostok, Japan dispatches troops under the pretext of aiding the Allies against Bolshevism. Temporary assistance, the newspapers call it. The soldiers, you note, seem in no hurry to leave. Historians still argue whether Japan's Siberian intervention was driven by anti-communist zeal or pure imperial opportunism. Some say Tokyo feared the spread of Bolshevism into Korea. Others insist it simply couldn't resist filling another power vacuum. The truth, as usual, lies tangled between strategy and greed. Back in Tokyo, the streets are filled with jubilation. Armistice Day brings parades, lanterns, and the sound of temple bells ringing through the crisp November air. The empire celebrates not only peace but prosperity. By war's end, Japan's industrial output has doubled. Its merchant fleet tripled. You pass newsboys shouting headlines, "Japan among the victors," and can't help noticing how the words shimmer between pride and disbelief. But for Japan's foreign ministry, victory is not enough. Respect must be won on paper, with signatures and seals. That means Paris. You travel with the Japanese delegation to the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. The voyage itself feels like a statement. White-gloved aides, lacquered trunks, telegrams in code. By the time your ship docks at Marseille, the Mediterranean air feels heavy with anticipation and suspicion. The Allied victors have come to divide the spoils of empire, and Japan, the outsider among them, is determined to leave with more than polite applause. Inside the grand halls of Versailles, you're surrounded by uniforms, monocles, and the rustle of papers thick with ambition. The Japanese delegation walks among them with quiet precision. Their goals are simple on paper, complex in politics. 1. Recognition of Japan's territorial claims over the German islands north of the equator and the former German concessions in Shandong. 2. An amendment to the Covenant of the League of Nations affirming racial equality among member states. The first demand seems straightforward. After all, Japan won those islands in battle. The second? Well, that one is dynamite. Historians still argue about who first proposed it. Some credit Baron Makino. Others say it came from a small circle of liberal advisors inspired by Wilson's talk of self-determination. Whatever its origin, the racial equality clause is revolutionary. For Japan, it's not just moral, it's personal. Decades of Western condescension have left scars. This proposal, in elegant, restrained prose, demands what gunboats and sieges never could: acknowledgement of Japan's equal humanity. You can almost feel the tension in the hall as Makino presents it. "We wish merely," he says softly, "to affirm the principle that all nations, great and small, shall stand equal in the eyes of the world." A pause, a cough, then a silence thick enough to choke on. The British delegates shift uncomfortably. Australia's Prime Minister, Billy Hughes, stiffens, already imagining panic among his white voters. President Wilson frowns, fiddling with his spectacles. "A worthy sentiment," he says at last, "but perhaps premature." That word, premature, echoes in your ears like a gunshot. The clause gains majority support in committee, but is blocked when Wilson rules that it requires unanimous approval. The Japanese delegation, disciplined as ever, remains composed. But behind closed doors, frustration seethes. "So," one diplomat murmurs, "we may die beside them, sail beside them, but not stand beside them." That single insult will linger for decades, festering like a wound beneath Japan's pride. Still, not everything is lost. The Allies grant Japan control over the Pacific islands it seized, transforming them into mandates under the new League of Nations. Officially, they are to be administered on behalf of the world community. Unofficially, they're Japan's now, stepping stones stretching across the Pacific. The Shandong question proves trickier. China, also at Versailles, demands that the former German concessions be returned to Chinese sovereignty. Japan counters that it inherited Germany's rights through conquest. The argument grows heated. Chinese students protest in Paris. Demonstrations erupt in Beijing, sparking what will become the May 4th movement, a wave of nationalism that will define China's 20th century. In the end, the Treaty of Versailles awards Shandong to Japan, but the moral cost is steep. China storms out of the negotiations. Across Asia, newspapers denounce the betrayal. "The white nations betray us," one Chinese headline screams, and Japan betrays Asia. When the Japanese delegation finally sails home, they carry a suitcase of triumphs and a trunk of resentment. They have secured islands, prestige, and a permanent seat on the League of Nations Council, but lost the world's trust. Back in Tokyo, crowds line the streets to welcome the delegates. The newspapers trumpet, "Japan, power among powers." But in university lecture halls, students whisper about the hypocrisy of racial equality denied. You overhear one mutter, "They will regret treating us as inferiors." It's not a threat yet, but you can taste the bitterness in the air. In the foreign ministry, the older statesmen sigh. "We have been recognized," one says, "but not respected." That, more than any treaty, defines Japan's mood in the years to come. Diplomacy has delivered victory, but not satisfaction. For all the toasts and parades, there's a hollow ring beneath the celebration, like a temple bell struck too hard. Outside, snow drifts across the palace moat, muffling the city's noise. You stand there a while, watching the flakes melt on your gloves. Japan has joined the table of empires, yes, but it has also learned how cold that table can be. You sit on the veranda of a Tokyo tea room, a spring rain pattering softly on the tiled roof. The war is over. The empire is richer, stronger, more respected than ever before, and yet somehow more restless. It's 1920 now, and Japan's diplomats return from Paris with medals on their chests, but doubt in their hearts. The world has smiled politely at them, patted their backs, and quietly closed the door before they could fully enter. Allied? Yes. Equal? No. You can feel it in the tone of the newspapers. Victory headlines fading into anxious editorials. Japan's gains at Versailles look impressive on maps. A cluster of Pacific islands now under mandate. The Shandong concession secured a seat on the League of Nations Council. But beneath those trophies lies something sharp. Humiliation. The rejection of the racial equality clause still stings like salt water on a wound. One Tokyo columnist captures the mood perfectly. "We are invited to dinner, but not given a chair." The younger generation reads those words with clenched jaws. You see it in the university lecture halls, in the faces of students wearing Western suits and simmering anger. They quote President Wilson's speeches about self-determination and laugh bitterly. "Equal rights for all nations," one sneers, "except the yellow ones." The laughter is quiet, but it spreads like smoke. In the foreign ministry, the mood is one of weary pragmatism. Baron Makino, the silver-haired diplomat who argued for racial equality at Paris, now sits in his office, surrounded by files and silence. "We were too early," he mutters to a junior aide. The aide doesn't answer. Perhaps because he doesn't believe it. Historians still argue whether Japan's bitterness after Versailles marked a turning point, a subtle shift from cooperation to resentment. Some say it was inevitable, born from racial prejudice and unequal diplomacy. Others insist Japan's own ambitions made equality impossible. Whatever the cause, the sense of betrayal is real. You watch the empire's newspapers try to spin victory out of insult. "League of Nations seat secured," one headline cheers. But even that success feels hollow. The League is dominated by Britain and France. Japan's voice, though technically equal, is rarely heeded. When we speak, a Japanese delegate grumbles, they nod and look past us. Meanwhile, the Pacific Islands Japan gained under mandate, Saipan, Truk, Palau, are already being fortified in secret. Officially, they're for civilian development. In reality, naval engineers are sketching blueprints by lamplight. Mandate, one officer jokes, means ownership with better manners. Back home, Japan's growing self-confidence begins to take a harder edge. Newspapers run patriotic cartoons showing the rising sun illuminating the Pacific, while Western caricatures hide behind clouds. The message is clear. If the West won't acknowledge Japan as an equal, Japan will prove it by its own strength. The resentment doesn't stop at Europe. Across Asia, Japan's neighbors seethe. China, humiliated by the Shandong decision, explodes in protest. On May 4, 1919, thousands of students flood Tiananmen Square, shouting, "Down with imperialism." And though their slogans are aimed at the West, their eyes burn hottest for Japan. You stand among them in the crowd, hearing the chant rise and fall like thunder. Placards name Japan the betrayer of Asia. Tokyo is startled. The protests spark a nationwide boycott of Japanese goods. Silk mills in Yokohama grind to a halt as orders vanish. Japanese businessmen, so used to the warm embrace of profit, find themselves shunned in every Chinese port. For the first time, Japan tastes what it feels like to be the villain in someone else's story. A quirky tidbit. One Chinese newspaper prints a satirical cartoon showing a Japanese diplomat holding a racial equality sign with one hand and a bag labeled Shandong in the other. The caption reads, "Equal, as long as you obey." It circulates secretly among university students across Asia, who pin it on their dorm walls. Tokyo's response is defensive, then defiant. Government spokesmen insist Japan's actions are for regional stability. Privately, many in power grumble that China should be grateful for modernization and protection. "We are not conquerors," one official says stiffly. "We are tutors." You nearly spill your tea laughing. Tutors rarely bring bayonets. Yet even amid the bitterness, Japan's diplomats still play the long game. They attend League of Nations sessions in Geneva, where they present themselves as responsible global citizens. They speak of peace, disarmament, cooperation. The speeches are graceful, the smiles genuine, or at least convincing. Japan's foreign minister, Shidehara Kijiro, becomes the face of this new diplomacy. Calm, rational, eloquent. Western journalists call him the gentleman of Asia. And for a while, it works. In 1921, Japan attends the Washington Naval Conference, where the great powers meet to limit battleship construction. It's meant to prevent another arms race. The resulting treaty caps Japan's navy at 3/5 the size of Britain's or America's. A compromise for peace, the papers say. You can hear the sarcasm in every syllable. Admirals grumble. "We saved their convoys in the Mediterranean," one fumes. "And now they measure our fleet with a ruler?" The resentment deepens, like rust beneath polished brass. Historians still argue whether the Washington Treaty preserved peace or planted the seeds of future conflict. To Japan's navy, it feels like a leash disguised as friendship. To Japan's civilians, it's a reminder that even cooperation comes with humiliation. At home, the public mood fractures. The Taisho democracy, that fragile experiment of the 1910s, begins to wobble under the weight of contradictions. On one hand, Japan is richer than ever. On the other, workers strike, farmers riot, and students demand reform. The liberal Asahi Shimbun urges the government to focus on domestic welfare instead of foreign glory. The conservative Yomiuri fires back. Prosperity is nothing without pride. The cabinet tries to balance both. Shidehara's diplomacy abroad, military buildup in secret. It's a political tightrope, and everyone knows one wrong step could send Japan tumbling into the abyss between democracy and dictatorship. One night, you attend a lecture at Keio University. The speaker, a young political scientist with sharp eyes, summarizes the national mood. Japan is applauded when she behaves. ignored when she contributes, and condemned when she succeeds. Tell me, how long can any proud nation live like that? The students roar their approval. Across the Pacific, the Americans are watching. In California, anti-Asian laws tighten. The 1924 U.S. Immigration Act bans all Japanese immigrants outright. Unassimilable, the senators call them. The insult burns like acid in Tokyo's newspapers. Racial equality denied again, one editorial fumes. The same racial rejection that began in Paris now echoes across the Pacific. You can feel something dangerous crystallizing. Pride and pain, resentment and ambition, all fusing into a conviction that Japan must no longer seek approval from the West, but surpass it. And yet, in the quiet of Shidahara's study, there's still hope. He writes to a colleague, "We must not answer insult with anger, but with excellence. The future belongs to nations that endure." His words sound noble. You can't help admiring the calm wisdom of them. But outside, the voices shouting for strength, for retribution, are louder. One rainy evening, you walk through the Ginza. Neon signs flicker, taxis hiss over wet pavement. Jazz spills from a cafe where foreigners drink sake mixed with gin. Tokyo feels like both New York and Edo at once. Modern and ancient, proud and insecure. You pause by a newsstand. The headlines scream about the League of Nations, about China, about a naval treaty that limits the empire's reach. But beneath the ink and electricity, you sense a deeper current. Japan has climbed the ladder of global power, but every rung feels greased by Western contempt. It's still the excellent but small in number nation, the polite ally always kept at the edge of the table. You close your umbrella and whisper to the rain. Equality may have been denied, but ambition is patient. For now, the empire smiles. It builds schools, exports silk, talks of peace. But in the shadows of that composure, something older and fiercer stirs. The conviction that if words and treaties can't win respect, then steel and discipline someday will. You wake to the low hum of Tokyo in the early 1920s, the sound of trams, merchants calling, and the faint, metallic symphony of an empire caught between pride and insecurity. The newspapers on your table still boast of Japan's victorious diplomacy, but the ink smells faintly of frustration. The applause of Versailles has faded, leaving behind a sour aftertaste. Now, as Japan's economy cools and its pride curdles, you can sense something heavier settling over the islands, a tension that hums beneath the polite surface. It begins with whispers of betrayal. We fought beside the West, but they do not see us as equals. You hear it in bars, in train stations, in the quiet indignation of young officers whose fathers once cheered the Meiji Restoration. For them, the racial equality snub and the Washington Naval Treaty feel like a national insult written in ink that never dries. Historians still debate whether Japan's resentment after the war was driven by wounded pride or hard economic reality. Probably both. The war boom that had made the empire rich now collapses. Europe is recovering, reclaiming its markets, and Japan's exports plummet. Silk prices fall, factories shutter. The once booming shipyards of Kobe echo with silence, broken only by gulls. You walk those docks now. The air tastes of rust and sea salt. A young man sits on a crate, staring at his hands, his uniform worn from a factory that closed last week. He tells you softly, "They told us we were building the future. Now the future's gone home to Europe." It's a haunting image, an empire that stretched its arms toward the world and now finds the world pulling away. Meanwhile, resentment abroad begins to fester into outright hostility. China, still furious over Shandong, refuses to forget. Students continue to boycott Japanese goods. Nationalist newspapers in Shanghai print cartoons of Japan as a vulture draped in Western metals. Across the Pacific, American isolationism hardens into open prejudice. The 1924 Immigration Act slams the door on Japanese migrants, declaring that they are ineligible for citizenship. The insult cuts deep. Tokyo's reaction is a mixture of outrage and resolve. If they will not let us live beside them, one newspaper editorial declares, then we will build a world where they must live beneath us. It's a line you wish had remained rhetoric, but you can already hear the applause rising from nationalists who've waited years to say exactly that. Still, the government clings to civility. Foreign Minister Shidehara preaches patience, diplomacy, trade. He insists that Japan's future lies in cooperation, not confrontation. We must lead by example, he tells the Diet. The West fears us because it does not understand us. Let us show them our virtue, not our vengeance. You admire his grace, but you also see the weariness behind it. Shidehara's critics, meanwhile, are sharpening knives. They call him the man who bows too low. They say his soft diplomacy weakens Japan's honor. The British have fleets, the Americans have money, one fiery young officer sneers, and all we have are handshakes. The audience cheers. You travel south to Kyushu and see another Japan, one that the polished diplomats in Tokyo rarely mention. Coal miners caked in soot, fishermen whose nets come up half empty, farmers whose rice fields have drowned in debt. The empire's industrial prosperity never reached them, and when the post-war slump hit, it hit hardest here. A quirky detail you overhear from a tea house matron. The farmers talk about the emperor like he's a kind uncle. The soldiers talk about him like he's a god. The students talk about him like he's a memory. It's a perfect snapshot of a country unsure what it's worshiping anymore: tradition, ambition, or illusion. The frustration simmers into something political. New right-wing societies form: patriotic leagues, youth movements, secret officer clubs. They hold torch-lit rallies waving flags embroidered with rising suns. The slogans are simple: Asia for Asians, Japan for the Japanese. They blame corrupt politicians, greedy merchants, and Western arrogance for everything. In their minds, honor is something that can be reforged only in fire. Historians still argue whether these movements were fringe at first or merely waiting for a crisis to bloom. Either way, they find fertile soil in the wounded pride of the 1920s. Meanwhile, China's nationalism continues to grow. The May 4th movement evolves into something bigger, a call for modernization and independence across Asia. Japan watches nervously as Chinese students chant for unity and boycott Japanese goods. Even Korea, annexed since 1910, erupts in rebellion during the March 1st movement of 1919. You can almost feel the tremor of it beneath your feet. 1 million people marching, demanding the freedom Japan once demanded for itself. Tokyo crushes the protests with brutal efficiency. Thousands jailed, hundreds killed. The government insists the empire is restoring order. You can tell the truth is far uglier. When the news reaches Western papers, outrage flares briefly, then fades. The world has moved on. But inside Japan, something fractures. Shidehara sees it too. In a private letter, he writes, "We cannot hold Asia by the sword and expect her to call us brother." It's a line that feels prophetic and heartbreakingly ignored. By the mid-1920s, Tokyo is a city of contradictions. Neon lights and jazz clubs coexist with military parades and patriotic sermons. You walk through Ginza, past posters advertising French perfumes and German pianos, and see soldiers in spotless uniforms buying postcards of Mount Fuji. Modernity hums like electricity, but it's haunted by nostalgia. The Taisho era's liberal spirit, the brief bloom of democracy and openness, is fading. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 doesn't just destroy buildings, it tears at the nation's psyche. Rumors spread that Korean immigrants are looting, rioting, poisoning wells. Vigilantes form mobs, and thousands of innocent Koreans are massacred in Tokyo's rubble-strewn streets. The same empire that demands racial equality abroad now turns feral at home. You watch smoke rise over the city and realize The fear that drives prejudice in the West is the same that drives violence here, the terror of losing control. As Reconstruction begins, militarists quietly step into the void. The army gains influence again, feeding off national trauma. The people need discipline, a general proclaims, and the army will teach it. You see young cadets marching through the streets, their boots striking in perfect rhythm. Children salute as they pass. Mothers bow. The tone of the empire has changed. Its heartbeat quickens.
A curious tidbit from the time. Factories begin manufacturing toy soldiers, miniature infantry in brown uniforms carrying tiny rising sun flags. They sell out almost immediately. Even playtime becomes practice. Yet, amid the tightening grip of nationalism, Japan still pretends to play the part of the polite global citizen. At League of Nations meetings, Shidehara continues to speak of peace, arbitration, and mutual respect. His speeches earn applause, but not trust. The Western delegates smile, then return home to write editorials warning of Japan's dual nature. By 1927, whispers of that duality have become prophecy. The same empire that builds railways and universities in Asia also trains secret military advisors in Manchuria. The same navy that talks of peace patrols the Pacific with a map of future dreams tucked beneath its charts. You find yourself walking along the Sumida River one cool evening, the lights of Tokyo reflected in the rippling water. The wind carries the faint smell of smoke from distant factories, the perfume of progress. Behind you, in some crowded bar, a gramophone plays a jazz tune imported from Chicago. A group of naval cadets laugh too loudly. Across the river, the silhouette of a new warship rises in the dockyards. It's an image both beautiful and ominous, a nation shining and trembling all at once. You close your eyes and realize something crucial. Japan's wounds from the Great War were never physical. They were emotional, cuts made by condescension, stitched together with pride. And like any scar, they've begun to itch again. In the distance, the ship's whistle blows, long, low, and hollow. It sounds almost like a warning. You wake in the chill of dawn aboard a mail steamer bound for the South Seas. The deck is slick with dew, the air thick with salt, and the horizon glows faintly pink. Ahead lies a chain of tiny islands, coral rings and volcanic ridges scattered like jewels across an endless ocean. Officially, you're here as an observer for the League of Nations mandate inspections. Unofficially, everyone knows what this really is: the quiet continuation of empire. The calendar says 1922, but the mood feels older, colonial, ambitious, full of polite fictions. Japan's South Seas Mandate covers the Marshall, Caroline, and Mariana Islands, captured from Germany in the early days of the Great War and legitimized by the victors at Versailles. On paper, Japan administers these islands for the sake of civilization and peace. In practice, it governs them like provinces. As your ship glides into Truk Lagoon, you see the changes already blooming. The harbor bristles with piers, warehouses, and radio towers. Japanese flags ripple in the humid breeze. Locals paddle canoes past cargo barges bearing crates marked Nanyo Kohatsu Kaisha, the South Seas Development Company, one of the many semi-official corporations that blur the line between business and state. Historians still argue whether Japan's mandate system was an early form of colonial empire or a pragmatic experiment in administration. You walk the dusty streets of Dublin Island and realize it's both. A Japanese post office sits beside a Shinto shrine. The school children wear sailor uniforms and bow before portraits of the emperor. They learn Japanese songs, Japanese geography, and Japanese arithmetic. One teacher proudly tells you that by next year, his pupils will read the tale of Genji. You nod politely, though you can't help wondering whether they're also forgetting their own songs. At the market, you meet a trader from Palau selling coconuts and seashell necklaces. His Japanese is fluent, his smile weary. They say we are part of the empire now, he shrugs, but the empire is far away. He gestures toward the radio tower, its steel skeleton slicing the tropical sky. That, he says softly, is closer than Tokyo. The naval presence here is impossible to ignore. Though the League mandates forbid militarization, you notice airstrips being tested and harbors being deepened. When you ask a local official about it, he laughs too quickly. Purely civilian works, he insists, as a squad of sailors unloads crates labeled machine parts. You don't press the issue, no one does, but the message is clear. Japan's empire has traded overt conquest for administrative camouflage. Back in Tokyo, the government praises these islands as peaceful laboratories of progress. The newspapers run photos of smiling school children and coconut plantations. The tone is missionary, almost paternal. "We bring light to the southern seas," one headline declares. But you've seen the shadows too. The small rebellions, the quiet resentment, the way some islanders lower their eyes when officials pass. A quirky little story circulates among the officers. During a flag-raising ceremony on Yap, a parrot trained to squawk Heil Kaiser refuses to learn the new anthem. The bird is confiscated and reportedly sent to Tokyo as a curiosity. You laugh when you hear it, but the image lingers, an echo of the old empire still refusing to sing the new song. By 1925, Japan's South Seas administration is in full swing. Thousands of settlers arrive. Traders, teachers, fishermen, even shopkeepers from Okinawa and Hokkaido seeking fortune in the tropics. Sugar plantations rise on Saipan. Phosphate mines open on Ongaur, and copra exports skyrocket. The empire calls it Nanshin, the Southern Advance. Officially, it's economic. Unofficially, it's strategic. You stand atop a bluff overlooking Koror in Palau. Below you, neat rows of houses glimmer in the sun. A Japanese naval officer beside you points toward the horizon. "These islands are our unsinkable carriers," he says quietly. "No nation can threaten us if we hold the sea." You wonder if he realizes how prophetic those words will sound 20 years from now. Historians still debate whether Japan violated the League's trust by fortifying its mandates. The evidence, though circumstantial, feels unmistakable. Pilots train in commercial aviation schools. Cartographers survey reefs for trade routes. Even the shipping lines, painted in cheerful civilian colors, are owned by companies that report directly to the Navy. Yet it's not just strategy at work, it's ideology. The government presents the South Seas as proof that Japan can rule with harmony, not oppression. "Our empire is not like the West's," Prime Minister Kato declares. "We lead Asia as elder brothers, not masters." You sip your tea reading that speech and can't help smirking. Every empire, you think, believes its rule is benevolent. Still, the ideal has its seductions. In the cities of the mandates, schools, clinics, and roads do improve lives. Merchants prosper. Local elites gain influence. Many islanders, caught between gratitude and resentment, adapt pragmatically. They bring medicine, one woman in Jaluit tells you, and taxes. She smiles wryly. We take both. Back home, the South Seas become a national obsession. Travel magazines publish dreamy spreads of palm trees and pearl divers. School books describe Micronesia as Japan's new frontier. You visit a Tokyo department store displaying tropical souvenirs, shell jewelry, coral fans, even jars of imported sand labeled genuine South Sea sunshine. The city's elite throw Nanyo nights, soirees with coconut cocktails and kimonos patterned with hibiscus. The empire, it seems, has discovered a taste for paradise. A curious tidbit: one popular song of the time, Across the Southern Sea, becomes a radio hit. Its lyrics gush about young hearts blooming like palms in the emperor's breeze. Catchy, ridiculous, and deeply telling. Even leisure has become imperial propaganda. But beneath the tropical glamour, another transformation unfolds. The Navy's logistical routes across the Pacific link with new commercial lines to Taiwan and the Philippines.
Japanese economists call it the Greater East Asia Economic Sphere. At first, it's just a term used in trade journals. Later, it becomes something much larger and darker. You attend a meeting at the Ministry of Colonial Affairs in 1927. Charts line the walls, showing shipping lanes and trade flows. An official taps a pointer at the map. "Our future lies southward," he says. "Not in Siberia, not in Europe. South. There, resources are abundant and resistance is weak." His colleagues nod gravely. You can sense the old Meiji hunger reborn in a subtler, more methodical form. After the meeting, an older bureaucrat leans toward you and whispers, "We used to envy the West's colonies. Now, we study them." He chuckles softly, but his eyes betray pride, not irony. You return to the islands one last time in the late 1920s. The harbors are busier now, the air buzzing with engines. On Saipan, the once sleepy port hums with trade. The school children greet you in crisp Japanese. The local paper prints editorials praising mutual prosperity under imperial guidance. Everything looks orderly, efficient, prosperous, and eerily uniform. As the sun sets over the Pacific, you stand on the breakwater, watching the sea turn molten gold. The wind carries the scent of salt, sugar, and engine oil. Somewhere behind you, a radio crackles with music from Tokyo, a waltz fading into static. You realize how far Japan's shadow now stretches, from the snows of Hokkaido to the equator itself. Historians still argue whether the South Seas mandates were Japan's laboratory for benevolent rule or its rehearsal for future war. Standing here, you know they were both. The empire's power no longer marches with banners. It drifts quietly on trade winds, planting flags in hearts and harbors alike. The waves lap against the rocks, rhythmic, endless. You listen and think, empires rarely shout when they grow. They whisper, pretending they've come to help. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the next whisper is already forming. The steamer's whistle fades into the fog of Yokohama Bay as you step back onto Japanese soil. It's 1929 now, and the world is shifting again. This time, not with cannon fire, but with collapsing banks. From New York to London, markets tumble, factories close, and investors clutch at air. Even here, half a world away, you can feel the tremor ripple through the empire. The boom that built Japan's confidence begins to crack. At first, officials dismiss it. A Western panic, they call it, temporary. But silk prices crash almost overnight, cutting the legs out from under Japan's most important export. You stroll through the Yokohama docks and watch merchants staring at unsold bales stacked like tombstones. The Americans are not buying, one sighs. They are not buying anything. Historians still argue whether the Great Depression hit Japan harder than the rest of the world. The truth depends on where you stood. For the bankers and factory owners of Tokyo, it was a slump. For the rice farmers of Tohoku, it was a disaster. You travel north, following the railway into the frozen countryside. The fields lie bare, the paddies crusted with frost. Villagers huddle around stoves fueled by straw. You meet a farmer's wife who holds up a small sack of rice, barely half her usual harvest. "The middlemen pay us less every year," she says, "but the taxes never shrink." Her husband nods silently, eyes hollow from hunger. Back in the cities, factory workers face layoffs as export orders vanish. Strikes erupt in Osaka. Students march in Tokyo. Inflation and deflation dance together like ghosts. Everything costs more, yet everyone earns less. The newspapers talk of restructuring. The people talk of starvation. Out of this despair, new voices rise, louder, angrier, simpler. "We have trusted the merchants and the politicians," one firebrand officer shouts during a rally. "Now let the soldiers save Japan." The crowd roars approval. It's easy to see why. The military, untouched by the chaos of markets, offers certainty, order, and identity. The Navy still gleams with discipline. The Army drills in neat formations.
The emperor remains a figure of divine steadiness amid the economic storm. You realize the paradox. While the world's democracies falter, Japan's militarists promise stability, and that promise is intoxicating. In Tokyo, political assassinations begin to punctuate the headlines like drumbeats. First, a business magnate, then a finance minister. The killers are young officers, self-proclaimed patriots convinced that corruption has poisoned the nation. One manifesto reads, "We shall cleanse the empire with blood and restore its soul." A quirky but chilling detail. When police raid one conspirator's apartment, they find not revolutionary tracts, but poetry about cherry blossoms and duty. The mixture of beauty and fanaticism feels uniquely Japanese and deeply unsettling. Prime Minister Hamaguchi tries to hold the line. A liberal in temperament, he believes Japan must endure hardship through patience and reform. But in 1930, when his government signs the London Naval Treaty, agreeing to further limit battleship production, the backlash is ferocious. To the admirals, it's betrayal. To the radicals, it's proof that civilian leaders are puppets of the West. That November, as Hamaguchi walks through Tokyo Station, a right-wing extremist steps forward and shoots him in the abdomen. The prime minister collapses beneath the iron beams of the platform, blood pooling around his hat. He dies months later. The gunman becomes a hero to ultranationalists. You can feel the balance of the empire tilting. Historians still debate whether the 1930s coup movements were spontaneous eruptions or orchestrated by hidden factions in the army. What's certain is that they grow bolder every year. Meanwhile, beyond Japan's shores, the world's chaos presents opportunity. China is fragmented again, torn between warlords and Chiang Kai-shek's fragile nationalist government. To Japan's generals, the weakness looks irresistible. Manchuria, they whisper, is our lifeline, our shield, our frontier, our destiny. You sit in a smoky officers' club in Mukden, listening to them talk. Their tone is half strategic, half mystical. Without Manchuria, one says, Japan is a bird with clipped wings. The others nod, their eyes bright with zeal. They speak of self-sufficiency, living space, and continental security. The language of defense barely hides the hunger for expansion. When the Kwantung Army acts in 1931, blowing up a section of railway near Mukden and blaming Chinese saboteurs, you're not surprised. The explosion is small, but its echo will shake the world. Within days, Japanese forces seize all of Manchuria, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo under the thin disguise of Chinese sovereignty. Tokyo's government is furious, at least on paper. The generals acted without permission, but the victories come too fast to reverse. The army has presented us with a fait accompli, one minister admits grimly. The public, weary of depression, greets the conquest with euphoria. Parades fill the streets. Children wave flags. Newspapers call Manchuria Japan's salvation. A Western correspondent writes in disbelief. They cheer as though they've found religion. In a sense, they have. In Geneva, the League of Nations condemns Japan's aggression. A commission investigates, led by the British diplomat Lord Lytton. His report calls the invasion unjustified, the puppet state illegitimate. Japan's response is swift and theatrical. In 1933, its delegate, Matsuoka Yosuke, rises before the League Assembly, bows slightly, and declares, Japan has no further use for this forum of hypocrisy. Then he walks out, the rising sun badge on his lapel glinting beneath the chandeliers. You can almost hear the door slam echo across the Pacific. The withdrawal from the League marks more than diplomatic defiance. It's a declaration of independence from the West. For decades, Japan sought validation from Europe. Now it rejects it entirely. We will stand alone if we must, an editorial proclaims. The phrase becomes a mantra. At home, the militarists are triumphant. The newspapers praise the Kwantung Army as heroes. School books glorify Manchuria as proof of Japan's destiny. You visit a classroom in Nagano where children chant, "The Emperor's realm extends forever." Their teacher smiles proudly. You can't help remembering those early sailors at Yokosuka, polishing their ships before the Great War began. Their grandsons now dream not of alliance, but of conquest. A small irony. Even as Japan turns inward, its art and culture flourish. Writers like Akutagawa's disciples explore modern alienation. Filmmakers like Ozu capture quiet family dramas amid the nation's turmoil. It's as if Japan's soul splits in two, one part yearning for harmony, the other sharpening its sword. You walk through Ueno Park one evening and hear a busker singing a melancholy tune, his shamisen twanging under bare branches. The lyrics drift through the cold air. The waves are restless, the shore unseen. We sail, and still we dream. It sounds almost like a prophecy. By the decade's end, Japan's path is clear. It has conquered Manchuria, defied the League, and embraced militarism as national gospel. The economy recovers, thanks to military spending and colonial resources, but the price is freedom. Civilian politicians are puppets. Dissenters vanish quietly. You stand once more on a Tokyo street corner as troops march by, their boots striking rhythm against the cobblestones. The crowds cheer. The flags shimmer. To most citizens, the empire looks unstoppable. To you, it looks like a train gathering speed on a downhill track. Historians still argue whether Japan's march toward war was inevitable after Versailles or chosen step by step. Watching the soldiers disappear into the distance, you think perhaps it was both. Fate written not in stars, but in pride, fear, and the endless hunger to be seen. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of iron and rain. Somewhere, faint and far, the temple bells toll. They sound less like peace now, and more like warning. The snow falls gently over Tokyo as 1934 unfolds, soft flakes swirling through the neon glow of a city that feels both modern and medieval at once. From above, the streets shine like veins of light. Trams rattling, vendors calling, and soldiers striding past as if the entire metropolis has forgotten how to walk casually. Japan's new rhythm is military, steady and unrelenting. You can almost hear it in the boots that echo down every boulevard. The empire's transformation is complete in everything but name. The civilian cabinet still meets. Newspapers still print editorials about peaceful development. But behind every policy stands a man in uniform. The admirals and generals have taken the wheel, and no one dares pull their hand away. You visit the Ministry of War one morning, its corridors gleaming with marble and the smell of tobacco. A colonel you met years ago at Qingdao greets you with a broad grin. "Do you remember when we begged the West for respect?" he laughs. "Now we make them ask for ours." He says it with pride, but his eyes are cold, measured, the gaze of a man who believes history itself can be commanded like troops. Historians still debate whether Japan in the mid-1930s could have turned back from its path. There were voices of moderation, Shidehara's, still echoing from retirement. A handful of journalists who dared to write cautiously about the limits of empire. But the machinery of expansion had momentum, and momentum rarely listens to reason. The new generation of officers, young, devout, and hungry for destiny, saw themselves as heirs to a divine mission. They called it the Showa Restoration, invoking the Meiji Revolution, but twisting its meaning. Where the Meiji era had sought modernization, the Showa radicals sought purification, to cleanse Japan of corruption, capitalism, and weakness. You remember walking through Hibiya Park one evening and hearing them speak, young men in brown uniforms shouting slogans about the Emperor's will and Asia's liberation. They spoke of the West's hypocrisy,
of Japan's betrayal at Versailles, of the need to reclaim honor through expansion, and the crowd cheered. It's chilling how easily resentment turns into righteousness. In 1936, that righteousness turns bloody. The February 26th incident begins before dawn, snow falling thick, muffling the sound of marching boots. You wake to find Tokyo under siege by its own army. Rebel officers storm the homes of politicians, killing cabinet members and occupying key buildings. They claim to act in the emperor's name, though the emperor himself is horrified. For 3 days, chaos reigns. Civilians hide indoors. Machine guns echo through government districts. You pass a group of schoolboys staring wide-eyed as soldiers drag bodies from a burning mansion. When the uprising finally collapses, its leaders bow before the firing squad and shout, "Tenno Haika Banzai," long live the emperor, as bullets cut them down. The rebellion fails, but its spirit wins. In its aftermath, moderate politicians lose what little power they had left. The military tightens its grip, purging anyone too hesitant or humane. Discipline has been restored, the newspapers declare, as if the city hadn't just trembled under gunfire. You step into a cinema a few weeks later to escape the winter chill. The screen flickers with a new propaganda film. Newsreels of shining ships, saluting soldiers, and cherry blossoms falling in slow motion. The audience watches in reverent silence. When the emperor's image appears, they bow without thinking. You do too, partly from respect, partly from instinct. It's impossible to tell where sincerity ends and survival begins. By now, Japan's schools teach children that the emperor is not just ruler, but divine essence, the living soul of the nation. 100 million hearts beating as one, a slogan reads. You watch a group of students reciting patriotic oaths in unison, their small fists clenched. They look so earnest, so innocent. You wonder if they realize the world they're being prepared to enter. A quirky tidbit from this time. Japanese factories begin selling toy airplanes alongside model soldiers, each box stamped with the rising sun. Children build their fleets and crash them heroically on kitchen floors. Parents smile, proud and uneasy. It's propaganda disguised as play, and it works perfectly. In the Pacific, mandates you once visited, construction accelerates, harbors deepen, airstrips lengthen, radar towers rise under the guise of weather research. Western observers suspect rearmament, but few have proof. These are civil improvements, Tokyo insists, even as submarines begin docking there at night. The South Seas Mandate, the empire's quiet frontier, has become its hidden fortress. Historians still argue whether the League of Nations simply looked away or was genuinely deceived. The truth, you suspect, is both. The world was too distracted by its own nightmares, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Ethiopia, to pay close attention to the Pacific. Japan learned from that negligence. If the West would not treat it as equal in peace, it could act freely in war. In 1937, the fuse finally ignites. The Marco Polo Bridge incident, just a brief skirmish outside Beijing, spirals, within days, into full-scale invasion. Japanese divisions pour into China, claiming retaliation, but advancing relentlessly toward Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing. The newspapers call it a China incident, as though minimizing the name might shrink the war itself. It doesn't. You travel with a transport column south of Tianjin. The air smells of dust and cordite, the sky an ashen white. Columns of soldiers march past, their rifles gleaming, their banners flapping red and white against the dull horizon. They sing as they march, patriotic songs in sharp, rhythmic cadence. "We bring order," one lieutenant tells you. Behind him, smoke rises from a burning village. By autumn, Shanghai falls. By winter, Nanjing. You hear rumors from the front, atrocities so monstrous that even seasoned officers grow silent when they speak of them. The government censors the details, calling it enemy propaganda.
But deep down, everyone knows something has gone terribly wrong. In Tokyo, the public greets news of victory with jubilation. Parades fill the streets, banners proclaiming Asia's dawn fluttering above the crowds. Children wave paper flags, women toss confetti. But beneath the music and marching, a darker truth is buried. This is not a limited campaign. It is the start of total war. The West watches uneasily. The United States protests, Britain scolds, but no one intervenes. In Europe, Hitler's rise consumes attention. In Washington, isolationism reigns. Japan seizes the moment. The government declares the creation of a new order in East Asia, a euphemism that sounds lofty but means domination. And yet, the empire still cloaks its ambition in moral language. Posters show smiling Japanese soldiers handing rice to Chinese children. Asia for the Asiatics, the captions read. You can almost hear the ghost of 1915 whispering through the slogan. Those same justifications from the 21 demands, now polished into propaganda. Historians still debate whether ordinary Japanese believed these ideals or merely obeyed them. Many likely believed both. Faith and fear make obedient twins. By 1938, Tokyo glows with confidence again. Factories roaring, ships sliding off docks, soldiers marching down avenues wreathed in banners. The empire has become a machine, and the machine hums beautifully. But you can sense the exhaustion beneath the triumph. Inflation rises, food grows scarce, censorship thickens the air. You step into a bookstore and find shelves stripped of foreign titles. Western novels have vanished. Translations of German military manuals replace them. Jazz is banned on the radio. Even conversation grows cautious. In cafes, people lower their voices before uttering anything that might sound unpatriotic. And yet, amid the fear, there's pride. The same people who once envied the West now believe they can surpass it. You recall the Colonel's words years ago. Now they ask for our respect and realize he was right. The world no longer patronizes Japan. It fears it. But fear, you think, is not the same as admiration. One night, you walk through Ueno Park again. The cherry trees are in bloom, their petals falling like soft snow on the gravel paths. Lanterns sway in the wind, and couples stroll beneath them, whispering. It's peaceful, almost absurdly so. You pause by the pond and listen to the distant rumble of troop trains departing from Tokyo Station, the sound carried faintly through the still air. The petals drift into the water, white at first, then crimson as the lanterns reflect off the surface. You remember a soldier's poem from the Great War, written decades earlier. The blossom falls, the nation blooms, the seed of peace in fields of doom. You wonder if the poet ever imagined how those lines would echo now, on the eve of another storm. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of spring and steel. Japan has risen, yes, but the higher it climbs, the thinner the air becomes. The winter of 1939 settles cold over Tokyo Bay. The air tastes of coal smoke and brine, the harbor filled with ships whose hulls glint under frost. Europe is at war again. Germany has invaded Poland, and the Western powers have once more drawn their swords. You stand on the pier watching dock workers load crates of scrap iron, fuel, and food bound for the mainland, and you realize that Japan, though far from Europe's trenches, is already feeling the tug of another global conflict. Across the empire, people whisper that history is repeating itself, but this time, Japan will not play a supporting role. Inside the Army General Staff Building, the mood is electric. Officers huddle over maps of Asia and the Pacific, their pencils tracing lines that seem to stretch forever outward, north to Siberia, south to the Indies, east toward Hawaii. The slogans have changed, but the logic remains: resources, security, destiny. The war in China drags on, devouring men and money, and the generals see only one solution: to expand further, faster, deeper. China will yield, one insists, stabbing at the map. If not by diplomacy, then by hunger.
You can hear the steel in his voice, the conviction that sheer willpower can conquer geography itself. Historians still argue whether Japan's 1930s militarism was driven by economic desperation or by ideology. You can see both at work. The Depression years taught the army that bullets could succeed where markets failed, and Versailles taught the nation that equality would never be granted, only taken.
In 1940, Japan formalizes what many already know: its friendship with Germany and Italy. The Tripartite Pact is signed in Berlin, linking the three in a triangle of ambition. On paper, it's a pact of defense. In truth, it's a handshake between predators. Tokyo's newspapers hail it as the dawn of a new world order, with cartoon suns rising over maps that conveniently omit the borders of others. When the news reaches Washington, American officials frown. The United States has tolerated Japan's expansion so far, but this alliance crosses a line. They are choosing their company, a senator mutters, and it is dark company indeed. Still, Japan moves carefully. It needs the oil, rubber, and tin that the southern colonies of Europe can provide. French Indochina lies vulnerable, the Dutch East Indies even more so. When Hitler's armies roll through Western Europe in 1940, Tokyo sees its moment. You imagine the conversations in those smoky conference rooms. Europe is distracted. Their colonies are undefended. The South Seas are ours for the taking. They say it quietly, but the ambition fills the room like the smell of burning coal. At home, Japan's people live in paradox. Part prosperity, part fatigue. The war in China has turned the economy into a machine, but a strained one. Silk has given way to steel. Luxuries vanish. Every factory hums for the military. Housewives collect scrap metal. School children weave camouflage nets. You walk past a line of women queuing for rice, each clutching ration tickets, their faces pale in the morning fog. A curious rumor circulates that people are painting cherry blossoms on the sides of bombers for luck, just as fishermen once painted eyes on their boats. The symbolism feels perfect, beauty and death entwined. You meet a young pilot at an airfield outside Nagoya. He's barely 20, shy but proud. "We are the petals of the nation," he tells you, quoting his instructor. "When the wind blows, we must scatter beautifully." You nod, unable to answer. It's faith disguised as fatalism. In the spring of 1941, a treaty of neutrality is signed with the Soviet Union, freeing Japan to look southward. That summer, Japanese troops move into southern Indochina. The reaction from the West is immediate and furious. The United States freezes Japan's assets and cuts off oil exports. Britain and the Dutch colonies follow suit. Overnight, Japan loses nearly 90% of its petroleum supply. Factories slow, ships idle. Fear seeps through the economy. Without oil, the empire cannot move. Without movement, it cannot survive. The choice is grimly simple: submit to Western demands or seize what it needs by force. You stand on a Tokyo street corner one sweltering July evening as newsboys shout the headlines. "American sanctions, national insult." Crowds gather, muttering, fists tightening. You feel the shift in the air, the slow, angry gravity of inevitability. That autumn, diplomats in Washington still pretend there's room for negotiation. The Japanese ambassador, Nomura Kichisaburo, meets politely with Secretary of State Cordell Hull, trading smiles that fool no one. Each side talks of peace while preparing for war. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Tojo Hideki, a soldier in a civilian suit, tells the Diet, "Our patience has limits. If we must fight, we fight for survival." The radio broadcasts his speech nationwide. Even in tiny fishing villages, families gather around the receiver, listening in silence. When he finishes, they bow to the unseen emperor. The quiet that follows feels heavier than thunder. Historians still argue whether Japan's leaders truly believed they could win a war against the West or merely hoped for a quick settlement. You suspect it was pride, not logic, that made the decision. A nation taught for decades that it must never bow again cannot suddenly learn humility. And so,
On the morning of December 8th, 1941, December 7th across the Pacific, the rising sun flag flutters above the carrier decks of the Akagi and Kaga as they steam through the North Pacific. The air is cold, the sea calm. Below deck, pilots sit cross-legged, listening to final briefings. One writes in his diary, "We fly not to kill, but to prove the spirit of Yamato." At 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time, the first wave dives over Pearl Harbor. You can almost feel the shock ripple across oceans. The roar of engines, the thunder of explosions, the columns of smoke curling into tropical sky. For a few hours, Japan feels invincible again, as it did at Qingdao a generation before. The radio in Tokyo announces the great success of our brave pilots. Crowds cheer, church bells ring. But even in the jubilation, you sense something darker, a momentum that can no longer be stopped. The empire has awakened the sleeping giant it once envied. Historians will later look back on this moment as the culmination of everything seeded in the Great War. The alliance with Britain turned to rivalry. The plea for equality turned to vengeance. The empire's hunger for respect turned to conquest. The same currents that carried Japan from Yokosuka to Malta, from Qingdao to Saipan, have now swept it into catastrophe. You walk through the Imperial Palace gardens that night. The lamps are dimmed for blackout. The air smells faintly of pine and kerosene. From far away, you hear the low drone of planes returning from training flights. Somewhere out there, a new world is breaking open, and Japan is at its center. The wind rustles the bamboo, and for a moment, you think you hear voices. The ghosts of the sailors who once patrolled for Britain, the diplomats who once pleaded for respect, the factory girls who once sang beneath wartime banners. Their stories converge here in this cold, sleepless night. You exhale, watching your breath vanish into darkness. Japan has risen. It has conquered. It has defied. And in doing so, it has completed the long arc begun in 1914, when it entered a distant European war to prove itself to the world. Now the world will answer. The night deepens, and the city sleeps beneath a sky of scattered stars. Somewhere beyond the horizon, ships churn through black seas, their wakes dissolving into the dark. The empire's lights, once symbols of progress, are dimmed now, covered, muted, waiting. You breathe slowly. The hum of engines and distant waves fades into a softer rhythm, the heartbeat of a tired nation. The sound is neither triumph nor defeat, just the low sigh of history exhaling. In your mind, you retrace the journey, from the docks of Yokosuka to the harbors of Malta, from the trenches of Qingdao to the classrooms of Tokyo. You've watched Japan grow from eager ally to wary rival to restless empire. You've seen ambition turn into ache, respect into resentment, and pride into peril. And yet, there's still a kind of beauty in the motion of it all. The way people chase meaning, even as the tide pulls them farther from shore. So tonight, as the waves lap softly against the seawall, let the noise fade. Imagine the harbor at dawn, the ships at rest, the gulls circling lazily above calm water. History may rage and roar, but sleep still belongs to you. Close your eyes, let the wind off the Pacific cool your face, and breathe in the salt and silence of a world that, just for this moment, has paused between battles. Tomorrow the tide will rise again. But for now, it is enough to drift. Sweet dreams.